Hello, everyone. It is Rhonda again with Climbing Culture Daily, and I am so happy that you're here. And so please hit that subscribe, like, and share this video today. So today we're going to dig into something that is always going around emotional versus logic. And I'm really going to talk about that men are just as emotional as women. And I know you've been told otherwise, but history, leadership, and violence say something different. So let's get into the climb today. So let's first talk about, male logic versus female emotion, because we're always talking about how women are so emotional. So we've been fed this narrative forever that women are just so emotional to lead and we're so sensitive to make decisions. We can't do it and we're just irrational. But let's flip it and really look at when we're talking about behaviors like war and conquest and all those types of things. Political retaliation, beefs, they're not always about logic. They're about unprocessed emotions and ego and power. And guess what? Anger is emotion and vengeance is emotional. And refusal to say I was wrong is emotional. And when men express emotion through control, violence, and domination, people don't call it emotion. They call it strength and logic. So we got presidents out here and we got gangbangers out here. We got CEOs that are just full of emotion, men making emotional decisions that have led to violence and betrayal and it's all emotional. Most fueled by fear and greed and dominance. And think about all the wars that have been started, assassinations that have happened. Logic isn't there. A lot of times, ego is set up as policy, and even when you think about retaliatory, shootings and gangbangs and don't touch my this and don't step on that and don't come into my neighborhood and don't do this, and a lot of that is fueled by emotion. It's not logic. Drake suing is not logical. It's emotional. And a lot of times what happens is all these things that we see men do every day, all day long, are just fueled by their emotions as well. And somehow women have gotten this, well, we know why, but this whole thing that we're just so emotional that we can't think clearly or make decisions. And every day we see men in leadership lead by emotional unintelligence, right? And a lot of it is just men not being taught how to feel without fighting. How do you get into understanding that you have a feeling without aggression, being attached to it? And that a lot of times comes with how masculinity shows up and emotional repression happens with men. And we do this even with our boys. What's really wild is, men are socialized to feel a very narrow range of emotions. So really just, anger, lust, pride. But what about like grief and being vulnerable and being scared? A lot of this we find gets suppressed. We think about when we talk to our little boys who I've literally seen little boys get hurt, like fall off of something and look like they broke something and they cry, and to have adults tell them don't cry. I was like, well, that really actually looked that hurt. Like I might cry. Um, and so it's really interesting how we deem those emotions to be frail or weak, or something that should not be desired in boys and men. And so when we are talking about women being emotional, what we're really saying a lot of times is women are allowed to express a wide range of emotions. I get to cry sometimes. Um, in certain spaces. Let me clarify that before people come for me. In certain spaces we get to we get to have a wide range of emotions. Definitely not in the workplace. So let me be very clear. And yet men really feel some of the same things. We just don't actually give the tools to men to be able to um really give permission to express them in a non-destructive way. And that is what you see when you see gang banging and school shootings, which are mostly done by boys, domestic violence, and rage. Um, Even rage in girls is unlearned um, ways of, or not learned ways of how to process the emotions that you're feeling. And a lot of times, what we see in men when it comes to violence, and most crimes and most things when it comes to violence are done by men. That's emotion, men. It's emotion. That's an emotion. Violence is an emotion. So, this notion that women are illogical and are just full of emotion is not representative of what we see every day. Men are very emotional, actually. It's just that we don't label um, anger and violence as an, emotional response to something. Where when we look at women and we see women raging, so to speak, crying, whatever, um, we see that not being actually tapped into your emotions. You're just, and when actually it's the very healthy things to do. When you see a woman crying, generally she's crying at something that should be cried at, right? Like it's a response, it's a way to respond to something, and a lot of times in a healthy way. Um, and it really comes down to that we are taught to be able to have all these emotions and to process them. And again, let me say, this is not to say there aren't women who, really have issues when it comes to their emotions. Not saying that. Not saying that we have it together. But I'm saying we are allowed to present all those human things that we have in us that come up in emotional spaces, right? When it's time to exhibit something, we're allowed to have that range. If we fall off a bike, we get to cry. And there's somebody there to help us get it together, help us to heal it. Help. On the other side, let the boy fall off the bike. That hurts the same way that it hurt the girl. And it's be quiet, suck it up. I understand that we are preparing, boys and girls for a very gendered world where the world expects men to behave in a certain way, and so that is why we do those things, but that does not mean it's healthy. Does not mean it's healthy. And so we really have to watch the narrative that we put out there. And it really matters because we have to really stop acting like emotionality is gendered. We get to address the real root of harm, which is emotional neglect or repression and disconnection. And um, whether it's at home and how we were raised, or even, in leadership, or on the block in the neighborhood. Um, Men feeling deeply without being taught how to handle the feelings is what we're seeing. Is it's how that's manifest. So when anger comes about and we don't teach how to process that anger, when the rejection, that is one area exactly what I'm talking about, is how men don't know how to handle rejection. We're not teaching that. Women get rejected a lot. I mean, I not we get rejected more than I think men realize we get rejected. Um, and so there's an aspect of learning you're not enough, or whatever. And so you start learning those kind of things, but men aren't don't learn those things. And so how to handle your feelings in a crisis situation, and learning is this isn't an attack on men and men's emotional state, but it really is an invitation to feel fully and freely, and start looking at how to take your emotional state and connect it to community, right? And unlearn the myth that being emotional is weak, and to realize that being unaware of your emotions is really a problem. And that's where the things break. That's where we have conflict, and that's where we have a lot of issues. And so we need to figure out, how do we help men understand whatever they want to say masculinity looks like, right? We know there's all these definitions, but there's something still wrong in that we have this state of violence that comes out of men when they are shaken emotionally, right? When something's just not right, and that feeling that comes up, and it comes out in a violent or an abusive way. How do we fix that, and how do we unlearn that having that emotion is okay? You just have to figure out where you put it, and how do you heal it, and how do you move forward? You see what I'm saying? So this narrative that women are so emotional, or we assign certain kind of emotions to women, is really just not that accurate per se. Men are quite emotional all the time. And even in women at a certain point, yes, we should also cry at a drop of a hat of everything. I mean, there's emotional maturity that needs to come about, even for women. So even certain levels of things that we need to figure out, and making sure that we have healthy ways of having, conversations, and how we are processing our emotions as well. But from birth, I think we have been allowed more space to do that and we don't allow men to have that space. And in the way that we talk about it, it limits men's ability to really get into it. And that's why therapy is very important for men. I need for y'all to go to therapy. I need for y'all to work it out and figure out how you connect your definition of masculinity to being an emotionally healthy person. That is truly key. So always understand, men are always emotional. Men have always been emotional. And really the question is, how do we create space for these emotions to be processed and not projected? And how do we help each other kind of climb through how we work together in our communication that's healthy on both sides. Like I said, it's not as gendered as we think. A lot of things aren't as gendered as we think, but gender is a social construct. Just as race, but it is what it is. So it is a climb worth taking. If you have thoughts about this and what I'm talking about, drop it in the comments and share and subscribe. I would love to hear, what your thoughts are on this topic, but with the advent of everything that's happening with Drake, um, the word emotional, he's acting like a woman, or his emotions are like a woman, or he's behaving like a woman, or he gets a man tat on him like a woman. All the things that you're kind of going like, well, y'all are emotional. This seems very much a male thing. We see the emotional um output of men's emotions all the time. Um and so yeah, let's talk about it. Let me know your thoughts, and until the next time.